Okay, so what we're going to do is look at just quickly, just the workflow for painting a very basic texture. Okay, this one that I did just now is still very crude and very splotchy. You'd still want to go and smooth it out a lot more and whatever. In Photoshop or whatever, the painting tools in Blender are limited, but at least you get a good sense of what's possible and get the basis done. Okay, so we're quickly going to look at just setting up the skin shader, also connecting the images, and then also just how I did that, which is basically just a material and a bump. Okay, blended with a spec like we do. Okay, so I'm going to erase this one. Well, not erase, but I'm going to swap it out for a fresh one. Okay, so into my node editor. Okay, we're going to go out of texture paint, just go into object mode for a second. Out of rendered mode, just select her. Okay, so that there tells you what shader we're busy working on. If we've got our shader tab, it also says over there. And currently it's set to the image that I used just now, but I'm going to swap it for a fresh one. So it's basically just go back. Let me just find it. Open. Okay, so there it is. Okay, so all that this is just a blank image, and I just put a picture of a face in there just for to color pick off of. Okay, so it's a lot easier for me to pick colors that I want to paint using that compared to the little painting wheel thing. Okay, so before we start, what we currently have set up, let me just go and smooth out once more. So just in here, I just want to click that up. Okay. Excuse me. So what we have by default is we have our two shaders which we're mixing together. Okay, so we have our subsurface scattering with the scale set fairly low. Okay, so this light doesn't shine in too much. With our image texture plugged into there. Okay, so into the color that goes into our mix shader, which then is mixed with a glossy set to 0.3 on the roughness. And that is blended using our layer weight, our color ramp, and our mix like we did. Okay, mix is then just to make sure it doesn't go from white to black, but white to gray, so we still get a slight speckle on the front. Okay, so now whatever we paint on our body texture should then apply onto our character. Okay, so I'm going to go into texture painting mode. I'm going to go over here into UV or image editor, and there is our UV. Okay. I accidentally unwrapped this while it wasn't mirrored properly, well, before the mirror was applied, so that's why I only have half my UVs, which isn't the end of the world. It's actually going to help a little bit for now, since I only have to paint one side of the face. I don't have to mirror it in Photoshop or whatever. Okay, great, so we have our base color, which is taken from the image over here. Okay, and if we set this from view, which it is on default, to paint, we can paint on both of these images. Okay, so we can paint in both windows. So we can paint directly on here if we need to blend something out, or we can paint on the model itself. Okay. Okay, so basically, how I approach this is starting off with the shadow tones. Okay, so starting off with the darker features of the face. Okay, and then adding in all the highlights compared to what we, well, depending on how we want it to look. Okay, so just a bit of like theory behind this. Whatever is behind the surface of the skin, okay, determines what color the skin turns out to be in the end. Okay, so if that's like your forehead where there's like bone, okay, there's not a lot of blood vessels, pretty much it's going to have a very light color. Okay, compared to if it's around your eyes or your nose where there are a lot of blood vessels, in your ears, it's going to be a bit darker because the blood vessels underneath there. Okay, so bear that in mind when you're painting it. There are well, there's a lot of theory behind it which I don't actually have to go to in too much detail, but yeah. Okay, so if you click on either of these colors, you've got two different ones. You can then over there go and select the eyedropper and go and pick another tone. So I'm going to pick a light one and a dark one. Okay, so just like a middle tone, and then I'm going to start painting on my character. Okay, so luckily it's going to mirror whatever I do, and if you press Control and paint, it's going to paint using your secondary color. So if I just go there and zoom in a bit, and basically just go and lighten up the shadow tones. Okay, it's lagging a bit, so I'm just going to drop the subdivision. Probably not that much, just leave it on 1. Okay. Okay, so you can see it's updating over there. And also, as soon as you start painting, what you should notice is that next to image there, they put a little asterisk, okay? Which means that you haven't saved your image. Okay, if you paint on it, you do need to save it again, otherwise you're going to lose everything. Okay, so just say save over there, and then it will update. So if you look in your actual file over here, this one, whatever, you would see that it's changed. Okay, so just make sure that you have actually saved. Okay, so using a very soft brush at a very low strength. Okay, it's quite small, just to go and start lightening up the shadows. Okay, doing this with a stylus is a lot easier. Okay, so if you have one, go nuts. Okay, so you can paint in both windows if you want. Okay, which is pretty cool. Okay, so I mean, this is pretty straightforward. I mean, there's nothing really complicated about it. You must, however, just be aware that you need to emphasize the colors quite a bit, okay, because your subsurface shader does tend to lose a bit of it. Okay, so you do over-exaggerate it in the color map. Okay, nose, top of the nose. Okay, I'm just going to bump this up a little bit more so it goes a bit quicker. Okay, so just getting some basic color on there. I'm not going to spend forever doing this because we just don't have time. Okay. Okay. Be careful when you're painting that you don't paint in artifacts. Okay, so little ditches and stuff that you can get rid of those nicely. Okay, for now I'm going to leave it there, and I'm just going to come up here, and I'm going to get like a pinkish color for the lips. Okay, so now basically just painting in some red and then some stripes on it and whatever. then a lighter one. Okay, this is going to be a bit crude, but it's not the end of the world. And there is also apparently a soften brush, but I'm not convinced that it actually does anything.
Well, that helps.
It's supposed to. It'd be awesome if it actually just smoothed it out a bit, but it doesn't, as you can see.
No, there is one.
Is it? Okay, anyway. And then something for her eyes. Okay, anyway, so the longer you spend on that, then you just need to save it first of all before you render it. So you go Alt S, saves, and then if you render, it's going to then show you what it looks like with that on. Which you can see is far less harsh than what it looks like over here. Okay, so you can go and paint on their faces or whatever. Okay. I personally hate painting textures, so yeah, I'm not crazy about it. But anyway, that's then basically the workflow behind that. Okay, the clothing, also again pretty straightforward. If you have them unwrapped, okay, so these, they're going to look pretty funny, but the UVs are really stretched out like that. And the reason for that is if we go and look at the image, it's basically we have an image of the material we want to use, okay, and then we fit the UVs, or adapt the UVs to fit onto that. So for instance, this is what I'm using, which is probably just going to turn up black on the projector. Okay, so you can see it's a bit of a woolly kind of material with a relating bump map. Okay, so here what I've done is basically, if we go, I think it's that one. Okay, there is my texture. I've basically now just gone and scaled the UVs up so that they fit on, so that the pattern is the right size. Okay. Nothing too complicated there. All that is in terms of a shader is a diffuse map, okay, with the image in, a bump node with the bump image in connected to the normal, and then our normal layer weight color ramp mix to actually blend the glossy just on the edges like that. Okay, so it's not too hectic. Okay, and that is pretty much it. Okay, in terms of setting up shaders, they're not as complicated as what you guys probably expect. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the only other thing there is the eyeballs. If you click over here, you can browse through the materials which you have. Let's go to eyeball. Ah, nice. Done.
Looks good.
Just fix that. Okay. Okay, the eye lens is just a refraction with a glossy blended like we do. And then the eyeball itself is, I think, literally just a diffuse. Okay. Nothing too hectic. Okay, so that is just catching up on last week's stuff. Okay, stop that.